which happens again in the next sentence when you're saying the gangs and gang warfare at the time meant that Fitzgerald had room for characters. Again, it seems like he's creating real people rather than characters. A lot of it will just come down from the verbs that you're using. So, for example, gangs and gang warfare at the time, and again, you could be more detailed, like which gang. So look at the purple gang and look specifically at who Meyer Wolfsheim is based on. So you need to say that Arnold Rothstein was the inspiration for the character of Meyer Wolfsheim, and just make it clear what the relationship between the context and the text is. The context inspires Fitzgerald to create some of the characters in this novel. Okay, so you've said that his crimes are perceived to be deeply un-American. Who perceives his crimes to be deeply un-American? Probably just the reader, I think specifically the American reader. But you need to look at Gatsby's reaction to Wolfsheim's crimes. That's what's really interesting, is that how Gatsby creates an illusion for himself that crime doesn't really matter, that there's nothing really immoral about crime, that it's simply another form of business opportunity. So go back to that section in the novel where there's the conversation between Nick and Gatsby about Meyer Wolfsheim, and look at Nick's questioning and definitely the tone of some of Gatsby's answers. That's the really important thing. At the end of this paragraph, you're starting the characters again as sounding very, very real, which they're not. So you've got to analyse, like I've said at the bottom there, the author's craft. There's been really no analysis of the author's craft so far. So you need to look at how Fitzgerald has used the setting of the speakeasy, what's he used that to do, how he's used dialogue, tone, implication, and how he's used context in order to make his points. So loads and loads of focus on Fitzgerald, please, rather than a focus on Gatsby, as if he's real. Okay, then we've got another one of these repeated sections that you need to work out. And if we look at the sentence that starts every Thursday, you can see how that, again, sounds like it's real and like it really happened. So Capote presents Holly, or Capote describes Holly's visits to the gangster Sally Tomato. Let's go to the page. But we don't have any quotation from her visits. Could probably do with one or two from that section, so you can talk about how is he presenting those visits, how is he presenting her relationship with Sally. I quite like this quotation that you've chosen next, though. This is a good one, for Joe Bell. And we do have some analysis. The first time we've got some analysis of language, the connotations of Black Hand. There's a really good opportunity here, once you've done your research on Arnold Rothstein, of making a really firm link between how both authors are using real-life gangs, the Jewish gangs of the 1920s compared to the Italian-American gangs of the late 1940s, early 1950s. That's where you need to weave in your very specific contextual link. I like your interpretation here. I like this Archduke Franz Ferdinand, but we need a reference, like where did you get that idea from? That's a good one. You've got a couple of quotations sort of back-to-backing at the end of this paragraph. I don't know how you're going to use the one about the little Jap knew it was her the moment he saw it. That needs some analysis. I need to know what the relevance of that is. Then you need to introduce the next quotation, which is her nameplate that she has on the door of her apartment, which is Holiday Go Lightly with capital G, travelling. And you need to really pull apart the connotations of each of those words. Why call herself Holiday? What are the connotations of that? Go lightly, again, what are the connotations of that? And what does travelling, like what is she emphasising about who she is, permanence, impermanence, etc. And the device is called nomenclature, like I put in my note. Okay, this very, very interesting piece of interpretation here. This is one of your best critics, one of the few critics that you use, but you've used it really pretty well. You've engaged with it well. I wouldn't call it Cinderella complex. That sounds too psychoanalytical. Archetype. Let's change it to archetype. Again, characters sounding real. Just rephrase that so you're focusing on Capote. Capote presents Holly, etc., and Holly's obsession. Make sure that we get a reference, so a footnote in there, so we know the full reference to the Dina Smith article. Okay, it gets better here. Turn over to the next page. But we still don't have any real analysis of Capote's craft at the end of this. So you need to look back over the quotations that you've chosen, make sure you've got the right ones, you've got enough to say about what Capote's methods were there. Okay, this is the Valley of Ashes. Now this is absolutely asking for some quotation and close analysis. We did this passage in class, I remember it well. So you should have lots to say about this. You've got a really nice link here to do with ashes, very perceptive. But you talk about the imagery of ashes. Myrtle lives in a place called the Valley of Ashes, but then you don't quote it. You don't look at how the Valley of Ashes is presented or quote any of the stuff about the ash grey men, etc. So we definitely have to have that in there. And some close focus on Fitzgerald's techniques in making this a grotesque and horrible place. Do the reference to the Dinah Smith article again, because it's a different bit of it that you're quoting there. And again, you introduce Myrtle's death, but you don't analyse Myrtle's death in any detail. So that's a shame, so you need that in there. You need quotation and analysis for the death of Myrtle. Okay, and trying to make it linked to kind of the death of illusion. Right, idiolect. This is your last final link point, isn't it? Okay, so you've got the right quotation, old sport, but you need to really explain in detail how does this have connotations of bourgeois. So you need to, again, just pick apart pick apart the tone of it, each word of it. What does the word sport kind of convey about the attitudes that he has to other people? He's assuming a friendship, isn't he, if he calls somebody a sport. Old suggests that he's known a person for a long time. He uses it a lot when he's talking to Nick. He hasn't known Nick very long, and he starts calling him that all the time. He uses it indiscriminately as well to call everyone old sport, as if he's known everyone for a long time, as he's friends with everybody. But we know that that's not true. Particularly the character in the novel who really objects to being called old sport and the phrase in general is Tom Buchanan. So think about what it is that Tom Buchanan is particularly objecting to. He's particularly objecting to the class connotations. The phrase itself is, like you said, it's creating the illusion that he's higher class than he actually is, because it's got a tone of superiority. So you need to find the bit where Tom really objects to it and think about why he objects to it. And here you've got disputing Nick's question. It's not Nick's question that's the bit that you need to quote. It's Gatsby's response. It's the interesting bit. Okay. And then you talk about the stories that he tells about himself. This is where we did the posters on kind of the fake versions that he creates of himself. So you need to find that. This is the, being a young Raj in India, etc. All of that needs lots of quotation, lots of analysis. Then you've got a lot of quotations from Nick, which are sort of back to back without a huge amount of analysis. So you need to look at each of them and say sort of what Fitzgerald's techniques are and what the impact is in each of those. Then I would take the sentence that starts about the opening sentence of the novel includes some moral advice, which is juxtaposed with this illusion. By this stage, you probably need, to be honest, a separate paragraph, excuse me, for this section. I'd break it there and just reorganise that so it makes a bit more sense. You've got a critic, Michael Hollister, on Nick narrating the objective self. You could go for another critic there on the role of Nick as narrator in general, because you don't have a huge number of critics, and that's an opportunity for maybe another one. Okay. Right, this page is the one that needs the most work, actually, overall, because although I've written the least on it, it's because none of it is really useful or linked to your topic sentence. Your topic sentence is idiolect. Okay, Holly's idiolect creates the facade. And yet what you then go into, all of this, down to the asterisk, all of that is narration. Okay, so it's all storytelling. You talk about Holly's story, who she was, where she came from, and you punctuate it with a load of quotations. None of it has got anything to do with idiolect. Okay, the only bit that's got something to do with idiolect is here, her language. Because idiolect means the words that she uses that other characters don't. The words that are fundamental to her conveying her character. Okay, so all of that page I would cut, to be quite honest. I would pick it up from the asterisk, including, so you basically got the word darling, but you've got other things as well that she uses. So particularly look at how she talks to Mags, and also maybe about how Mags kind of does the same. Mag Wildwood also engages in this form of artificial idiolect in order to characterise herself as something that she's not. The mean reds is a phrase that you can use as well, because she's being a lot more honest about herself there. Okay, so you've got bibliography, which is fine. I'm just going to show you where on the mark scheme I've kind of put you right now, which gives you a bit of a sense of how much work you've got to do to move up to where you want to be. So this gets marked in a cluster for AO1, which is the quality of the argument and the terminology that you've used, so the techniques that Fitzgerald and Truman Capote use. AO2, which is the quality of your analysis, and AO3, which is your context. Okay, so you can see that that is really a band and a half lower than the other side. So that's the main thing you need to look at. What I've said in my comments is that there is very little contextual detail. There's some general stuff about the 1920s, and there's some stuff about the American Dream, but there's nothing specifically on Breakfast at Tiffany's in terms of 1940s, 1950s context. So you've not really looked at the difference, the post-World War II context. Is it similar, different to the post-World War I context? The main area is really AO2, though. You've got to analyse and not treat characters as if they're real. And we could possibly do with another critic on Gatsby. But essentially, the connections and the interpretation bit is better. It's better than the other side anyway. So that's not your main focus. Your main focus is over here on AO3 and AO2. Okay, so use the bank holiday wisely, and we should be able to move that up considerably.